Tommy, thanks for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's nice and cozy here in your house in Las Vegas. Funny. I booked the studio here. I've done about 10 different times. I've come to Vegas to book a studio, and we booked it the hour thing on the internet script. But it's kind of nice to be able to just visit someone in their home,
Yeah, it totally works out good, especially since I was telling Dakota here that this is the first time anybody's been in the studio. So no better way to christen it than with you, bro.
Hey, it's perfect, man. Well, you got a great story. I love what you're doing. I've kind of dedicated my life to trying to help men in all aspects of life. And you've kind of niched it up a little bit. A couple things. One of the things that I'm smart enough to do is know what I'm an expert on and what I'm not. And one thing I'm not an expert on is being a husband. I've never been married, 42 years old. And talking about relationships, I just realized, I'm in a relationship right now, and I'm realizing that you only can learn how to be a great boyfriend, husband, partner by being in it, and I've read all the things and I've studied it, and it's helping me a ton. But ultimately, you've got to be in the trenches doing it. And, I love that you've been able to take this platform. And that's one of the reasons why I want to have people like you on my show. So instead of me coming on and pretending like I know what I'm talking about, I can bring on the number one husband coach for Christian men in the country, and we can jam.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, brother. It is so weird because I never would have thought like husband would be my thing. I have a crazy backstory and whatnot, but at the same time, because I came from a crazy family where my dad was like super abusive and like cheated on my mom, did all these other things. And then fast forward, 25 years later, I'm like coaching men in all these other spaces and being a husband. So it's just weird how like I go from a crazy situation to being here. But I would have never told you years ago, oh man, I just want to be a husband coach and I'm going to be great at it. I just thought it's just weird how God gives us these talents and then we just grow into them,
Well, so that's pretty ambitious, right? Like you call yourself that, and then you better be a good husband all the time, right? Like a lot of pressure to live up to that a little bit. But I think it's a good accountability too, more than anything. But how did this come about? How did you end up in this space? Maybe I'd love to hear your backstory. I think my audience would as well.
Yeah, so one of my favorite Bible verses, as you kind of know, like I just love Christianity and Jesus and things like that, is Genesis 50:20. And it says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And so as I just kind of hinted towards here, and I kind of hate sometimes when I do this, because I kind of throw my dad under the bus, but my dad was a sheriff's deputy. And so, respectable in other people's eyes, but behind the doors, was physically beating my mom, verbally abusing her, verbally abusing me and my brother, and then like bringing his girlfriends around us for years. Right. And so I despised him for these things. He was a good dad in certain ways, monetary ways and those type of things, but not really showing me how to be a great man and leader and all these other things. And fast forward, I started following into his footsteps and doing the things he was doing, not physically abusing, because me and Diane started dating when she was 17, 18, now I'm 43. So we've been together for 25 years total. But I was cheating on her, not being a good person. And I'm like, dude, I hate my dad. And I hate to say that. I don't anymore. But at that time, I despised him. I'm like, dude, you're becoming this person that you despised in so many ways. And so I did all the terrible things, was a drug addict, like went to military prison and like all these things that I was doing wrong. And then I had like a radical encounter with Jesus because everything in my life was going wrong. And then because of that, I had like a 10-year period where I was on fire for the Lord, or at least I thought I was serving the Lord, and I was being with kids and all these other things. And I ended up becoming an entrepreneur at like age 31, and it quickly went bad. I didn't have the skills, right? Like being a great husband kind of fell in my lap. Being a great entrepreneur, not so much.
What's funny, I always say like 90% of people that are entrepreneurs probably shouldn't be doing it, to be honest. Like it's really hard.
Dude. It's by far the hardest thing that I've ever done.
There's so many aspects to it.
So much blessings, right? And so much great things. So we could just do a podcast in the middle of the day like this, but then how the brain doesn't ever shut off, right? And it all depends on you. So anyways, make a long story short, at 31, I quit my job to be an entrepreneur, 2 young kids, a mortgage, and a wife. And I watched my bank account basically go down to zero. And at that point in time, I was like, well, what am I going to do? I have no skills. I went to military prison. And then for 10 years, I just worked at a casino and just paid jackpots and walked around and talked to people. And so I don't have no skills in life. What am I really going to do? And I was in this small little town called Eureka in Northern California. And at that time, everybody was growing weed illegally up there. That was before it was like legal in dispensaries everywhere. And I was watching all my friends ball out and like big trucks and trips around the world and all these other things. And I'm like, man, you guys are not serving the Lord. You're not really great human beings, and you're the riches of the world. And it looks like life is amazing for you guys. And all I'm doing is serving the Lord and being a good husband and father. And my life seems to kind of suck a little bit right now. So I thought, because the finances were bad, at that time. Little did I know I was just being tested by God to see, like, are you really made of this? Like, what are you really going to do when I put your back against the wall? And so anyways, the very first time I ever heard God's voice in my life, I was just stressed, man. I was like, Father, like, I don't know. Should I grow weed? Should I not grow weed? I don't really want to do it, but I also don't want to be broke and like all these things. And he literally, like, I still see his face to the day. He like looked in my eyes and said no. And that was the very first time I ever actually heard his voice.
Mm.
I did it anyways. And for the next 8 years, I got unlimited money, free time,
So you were growing weed illegally for 8 years?
Yeah. And every year got worse, bro. I was like, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit. And I'm going to quit.
How did that look? Did you like have your own farm and you just like, you had your area that you would basically go and cultivate the weed or what?
Yeah, I mean, I know this podcast is starting out great. Just me sounding like a great person, right? Like I went to military prison and like.
But that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, that's why you can help other people because you have done some of these things, and.
Yeah, one of the lines I always use is, and I got it from Ed Milet, is you're most qualified to lead the person that you used to be, right? And that's just 100% true. And so it's just part of the story, right? But anyway, so my house, it was an indoor operation. So I had turned like probably a third of my house into a grow, which was hard because I have 2 young kids in the house. I didn't hide it from them, they saw it, and then my wife. But it was sad because my wife had to like douse herself with like perfume to be able to go to work, and then my kids going to school smelling like weed. Now, granted, where we were, it wasn't like foreign, but it still wasn't like, hey, you're an awesome individual because you're doing this. And so, so I did it for 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just to give the audience an idea, the peak, what were you pulling in a month selling weed?
I think we'd probably do 150 grand a year.
Wow.
So nothing crazy, but at that point in time, I went from making a job before that of 36 grand a year, to now, what is that, almost 4 times my money and tax free, and
did that change your operation when they legalized it? Did that make it harder to work or easier, or did not really affect it?
So I got out like right as it was really kind of switching to where it was like, you could really grow legally everywhere pretty much. So the prices were going down and things like that. I got out right before that, which I'm thankful. So I didn't like wait until the end and be like, well, I got out just because it ended.
Yeah.
I had some character in it where I was like, no, I got out.
Well, I was going to ask that next. Like, how did you get out of it?
As we were kind of talking about earlier, I raced BMX bikes on the national circuit, and I had quit for a couple of years. But ironically enough, like I live in Vegas now. We came to Vegas to go race a national in January of 2020. And I crashed first lap of the season, spent time in the trauma ICU here in Vegas. I severed 5 ribs, collapsed a lung, separated my shoulder, like I had tubes coming out of my lungs. And when I was laying in the back of that ambulance on the way there, I literally thought I was dead because I couldn't breathe and I couldn't move. And the way the paramedics were talking, they were like, basically, this guy ain't gonna make it. And I was just like, man, I'm 39 years old, 2 young kids. My wife's in the front of this ambulance and my kids are back home in Eureka in a grow house as we speak. I'm like, dude, what kind of a terrible individual are you? What did you do with your life? How did you get here? And in that moment, dude, I didn't feel Jesus 1%, not even 1%. And I'm like, dude, I'm about to die and I don't feel Jesus. I was still going to church and I was still praying every day, but I was going against his will. And because of that, I was like, dude, like, you got to change things. And it was that moment. And then COVID hit like 2 months later. And so it was like, it's game time, baby. Let's roll the dice and go all in and just see what happens.
And so that's when you moved here permanently to Las Vegas then?
Yeah.
And so was it that accident that kind of prompted you to start doing what you're doing now?
Well, I'd always been into fitness. Like that was my thing. And so during those 8 years that I was growing weed, like that was the only, and this is sad to say because I had young kids and a wife at the time and I spent a lot of time with them, but I wouldn't say it was like where I just was overabundantly joyful spending that time with them because my brain wasn't present there because I was so depressed in a lot of ways. Gosh, I forgot where I was even going with that.
Well, essentially just ultimately you made this shift that, okay, I'm going to start coaching men now on how to be a good husband.
Yeah, that's what it was. So anyways, my only happiness during that eight years was I would go to the gym, right? And that was the happiest moment of my day was like, man, it's gym time. I would just go and work out for an hour and a half and I'd watch my diet and all these things. So at the end of it, I was like, oh, I'm going to become an online fitness and nutrition coach. That's going to be my way out. So we started in that space and I still love fitness. Like I went to the gym right before we got here, but quickly I was like, I can't talk about macros all day long.
Yeah.
I can't do this after a while.
It was like my original podcast was going to be around real estate, and I'm like, I can't talk houses for years and years and years. I got to have more interesting things. Probably very similar.
Totally. I mean, some people have that, right? Where that's like,
Sure.
man, I could just talk this all day.
Yeah.
For me, like, yes, important, but not something I just could do all day. That's going to fill my cup, And I know that's how you feel now with like coaching. It just like fills your cup. You're excited to be able to talk about it. Same thing. I got to get excited to talk about what I talk about. But so that wasn't doing it. So we moved here with the intention of doing that. And we started in that space. And then after it slowly switched to mindset, because obviously mindset's a huge part of fitness, as you know. And so I love talking that aspect. But when I had to talk about macros, I was like, all right, well, maybe I just need to remove these parts and spot more mindset. And we were connected with a bunch of coaches. We've always just been hiring in coaches and things like that. And one person was like, man, you and Diane have something special about you guys that like, it's just your guys' connection, the way you guys talk, the way you guys just interact and move together is something like we haven't seen. He's like, you guys need to be in the marriage space. And everybody always, when they would mention Tommy, they'd mention Diane. Same thing. Like it was never like, hey, do you know Tommy? And then they were like, yeah, is the guy married? And it was like, oh yeah, him and Diane. It was always that. And it was kind of like God was always showing us, because we were always the couple people came to for advice, and then was like, well, let's give it a shot. And dude, it was crazy. The very like first week of doing marriage coaching online, the very first post got like 7 million views. It went from like having 5,000.
What was it about?
Dude, it was the simplest post too. It was her doing lunges in our garage. And it said something about her self-worth and how it impacted our intimacy life because she wasn't confident in her body. And it was something like that. And how fitness is so important to a healthy marriage. And it went gangbusters. And it was like, hi, God, we see you. We see what you're trying to do here.
Well, that's where I want to go with this next, is I really want to get into some of these things, because again, I've dedicated my life now to trying to help men in all aspects of life, and being a great husband, I think, is probably the most important role for a man. Even I think I put it ahead of being a father, even because if you're a great husband, you're showing your kids how to treat a woman, how to treat their mom, and all those kinds of things. And so let's dive into it a little bit. Like, I guess, what is the difference between men that are being a great husband? Like what are some of the things that they're doing that maybe the husbands that are not doing such a great job are missing?
Well, I mean, I think if anything, it comes down to leadership, right? And it's weird because sometimes I'll talk leadership online and they're like, leadership? What's that? Come on now, and it's just like, it's so overlooked. And I get it. A lot of men just do not understand. They think once you get married, like you've won the Super Bowl. Like you can stop putting in the work. They think the wedding ring is like a participation trophy in so many different areas. And so then they go do their own stuff. They're just pumping in their gas into the business or doing other things, or they're living separately. But the Bible talks about two becoming one, right? And so actually doing life together. And to just touch on something that you said a minute ago about like being a husband's more important than being like a father, right? And so we say there's like this priority list that like one of the very first thing we teach our clients is that it goes, and I'll explain it, but it goes, God's self, marriage, kids, and then business should be your priority list. God, self-explanatory, right? The only reason I have self above marriage is that we got to make sure we're spiritually, physically, and mentally on point, right?
And you're not, you can't love somebody more than you're loving yourself, essentially. You're not going to take care of anybody else better than you're taking care of yourself. And so, I think that makes sense.
Dude, our whole program is based off of when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. It's the whole thing that it's based off of. And the key words is, as you love yourself, right? So you can only love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And in our culture, right, everybody thinks it's, we got to just love and do all these other things. And it's like, yes, but if your cup's empty, good luck. Because then you're going to be defensive. You're going to be angry. You're going to be stressed and all of that. And that's not going to be a loving husband or father, right? So when it gets back to the priorities, right? So self and then marriage. And then when you're married, two people showing up with full cups, that then overflows onto the kids, and they see what a great marriage looks like. And this is what possibility looks like. And this is the standards for our daughters. Like, I want a husband like this. And this is what it really looks like. And then our sons being able to say, okay, this is what a marriage looks like. And then they have the blueprint, right, to go out. And then, so if your marriage is killing it, self-marriage, kids, by the time you get to business, your life is on point, that you're like, dude, I'm not really stressed if the bottom line is going like this. But if business is first, you are stressed because then the home life's terrible. Your kids don't really look up to you. Yourself is overweight or spiritually dead. So you need the business to be thriving to try to stay happy. And so that's where I really see a lot of husbands just got that wrong in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, they have the focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Why is it so important to have a Christ-centered marriage?
Ooh, oh man, like What I know is just from as long as we've been coaching, and I just know this in my own personal life, when I've moved personally, just let God move down on the list, it's just crazy like how much it's the barometer. It's almost the thing that pulls everything up and down, my happiness, my joy. So if I take God out and put like, hey, I'm skipping church, or I'm not in the word on daily, or I'm not tithing, or I'm not doing these other things, I can instantly watch over the next few, like if it was a graph chart, my joy, my stress, and all that stuff change. And so I've just known from coaching, the number one thing is almost most men come into my program and they're believers in Christ, but they're not followers. There's an amazing book called Practicing the Way by John Mark Comer. And he talks in there about there's 64% of Americans right now are believers in Christ. Only 4% are actual followers in Christ.
What's the difference?
So a believer is like, hey, I like raised my hand at church, I accept Christ. I had this moment where I'm like super excited and all this other stuff. And then I go about my day. Sunday I show up, maybe I show up to church and I listen, great message. And then I just go about the worldly things. Whereas a follower, like you're actually doing what the Bible says. We talked about Keith Craft before this. His son, Josh Craft, always says there's two ways of doing things, God's way or the wrong way. There is no gray area where it's like, I love the part where he died on the cross for me. I don't love the part where it says I shouldn't be drunk. I love the part where he died on the cross and has grace, but I don't love the part where it says I should be doing these other things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And so and Jesus says, my mother and brothers are those who hear the word of God and put it into practice. A lot of people don't want to put it into practice. And so those practicing things are being in the word, being in community, tithing, fasting, serving others, solitude, daily prayer, and all of those things that if we do those things that Christ asked us to do, then we're actually like following him rather than just being like, I believe, and not doing anything he says.
Yeah, I think, the strength of, I was listening to Joe Rogan, and he had somebody on that said, if I was trying to destroy the United States, I'd start by trying to get people to make it uncool to go to church or keep the families from going to church on Sundays. Like that was the strength of this country.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of been under attack for a long time now because I think our enemies know, whether it's, Satan or, just literally the other countries that want to see us be weakened as the defender of what America has been. I think they really have attacked the churches and the family.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the two things that I do believe make us strong and community, right? Make a strong country, a strong union.
Yeah, 100%. So I was reading the Bible, so what I love reading the Bible is every time I read it, like it hits me a little bit different, even though I've read it a million times. I was reading the other day, it was like Matthew chapter 2, and it was talking about how Joseph was told that Herod was killing off all the babies. And in a dream, it said, hey, you need to go to Egypt. And it said in the middle of the night, he got up and got his family and left. It doesn't say Mary complained. It said, whoa, bro, we're not leaving anywhere. And she followed him to Egypt because she trusted him, because she knew he was yoked. They were yoked together, equally seeking God, right? And because of that, then it's trustworthy. Whereas I see so many men, just kind of circle back onto what you're saying, why that's so important is my wife used to never trust me. And I guarantee a lot of men listening to it, their wives probably nag them or get frustrated with their purchases they're making and arguing and things like that. That used to be my wife. She used to nag me, not arguing, but like, no, I could get like, before I'd even get the pitch out of my mouth, it was a no. Now, like literally she stopped me last summer on a walk and she said, Tommy, you literally can do whatever you want. And it's a yes from me. Like, and that felt so good as a man, but it's because I'm a spiritual leader of our house. I pray over our family every single day. We're in church. I speak and she watches me lead and base every single one of my decisions off of what Christ is telling me. And because of that, she trusts that it's not my heart, that it's God's will that I'm following. And so she trusts God. So then she can trust me because she knows I'm making Christ-centered decisions. And so it's not that she's following me. She's technically following me, God through me in those ways. And it just makes things go so much easier. Where if most men are just believers, they're not getting that following. And so their wives are having a hard time trusting their actions.
Yeah, I think that's everything. And I think that comes with, you had to change your behaviors. Your wife, of course, she didn't trust that previous version of you. Mm-hmm. How did you guys get over the hurt and the pain that you had caused when you were being unfaithful in earlier on in your marriage?
Great question. It's probably one of my favorite things to coach on is using our pain for good. And that's kind of like that Bible verse I said, Genesis 50:20 at the beginning here, is when we use our hurt for good, the more we talk about it and then see good come from it, the more we get healed from it. So the more I speak about, hey, I cheated on Diane, like I know your similar principles for men are very similar to mine as like authenticity and vulnerability, but vulnerability is a huge part of this part. So if I don't tell people that I cheated on Diane 20 years ago and I'm holding it in, and Diane's like, we're not going to tell anybody because this hurts. Well, then now we have this dark secret inside of us and we're not speaking on it. We've spoke on it now thousands of times that it's not even a pain anymore. And we've changed so many lives from it that it's not even an issue because of that.
Well, I've seen in my program, vulnerability is a superpower when you truly use it. And what I mean by that is like when you have worked through some of these things and you speak about them, and all the things you think make you unlovable, all the things you think are going to make people not love you as much, when you speak about them and you see how it helps other people, and you realize that it actually goes back and heals the pain of the experience because it gives so much purpose in today's world, and you get to see how you get to benefit the lives of these other people. And that's why it is such an important pillar in my program. And I have so many people that are embarrassed about, these things. And a lot of times they're not even terrible things. Like I know when I, growing up in the religion that I did, I was actually a virgin into my 30s. So I was 31 years old, but I had so much shame just because I wanted to have sex. My thoughts, I was like, if anybody ever knew my mind, they'd think I'm a horrible person. When in reality, it was just my physiological body begging to, be used essentially. But at the end of the day, I think that's so important. I think that, truly being able to work through that and then being able to have the strength to share it without being embarrassed and let people know. One of the mistakes that I used to make in relationships is I used to think that, you didn't fight, or you could find the right person, or the best couples never fight, all those kinds of things. And it's just a myth. It's a lie. Like the best couples can disagree and they argue and they have, the crap they've had to work through, and they, because of that, they have that much stronger of a bond. And, I know my closest friends, the ones that have the strongest marriages, have gone through the most and they've come out on the other side of that.
Yeah, man, vulnerability is so huge for any man to do it. And it's crazy because like you said, most of the time it's not even something that's that big that they're holding in and they just think is so terrible. And most couples that we work with, they don't even know each other. They know, what they smell like when they fart or what their bills look like and all these things, but they don't know what they're thinking. They don't know their goals. They don't know their dreams. They don't know their things they're scared of. They don't know of anything that's actually going on in their brain, because men are told to suck it up and deal with it, right? But dude, the person who says suck it up and deal with it's actually the weakest person in the room, right? And so when we can be that person who just shares it, not they're complaining and whining.
No, and it's not from a victim standpoint. It's just to be able to share that, like, hey, this is the reality,
Yeah.
Yeah. And you give the blessing of other people to be able to go through it with you, or to be able to, support you in that and those different things too, which is something that we unfortunately withhold a lot of times when we're in our own pain.
Yeah. Totally. And I know it's been big growth for me and my wife was when I just started sharing everything that I was going through. Like the one thing that like really is such the simplest tip, but the one thing that drastically changed our life outside of, following Christ was every night we go on a walk, pretty much like 360 out of 365 days of the year, whether it's raining or anything, we're out on this walk every single night, 20 minutes, sometimes it's 45 because we're in such a great talk. At first it was really uncomfortable because it was like, what are we talking about? It was kind of simple stuff, After a while, because we've done it for so many years, like we just instantly get into a phenomenal conversation and we just boom, 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 sharing so much. Now we know each other so much. And so I will push back on one thing that you said right here, though. You said not everybody argues. And I'm going to say this, and I get tons of hate on this, bro, that me and my wife probably haven't argued in about 10 years.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean we don't have discussions where she's like, well, I don't know if I believe in that. But it doesn't have to be like, well, you're stupid and like,
of course,
that. Yeah. And so because we're talking so much on those daily walks, so I'm sure everybody's familiar with the 5 love languages, right? Our pushback on the 5 love languages is, yes, they're very, very true. But when you get quality time to number 1, then you'll want to have physical touch. You'll want to have affirmations. You'll want to do the acts of service, and you'll want to give gifts. But if you only do them because like, oh, Jimmy, I know you love acts of service, and so I'm just going to do it because I know you like it. My heart's not really desiring it. I'm just doing it because I love you, man, and I want to do it. But because I know you so well, as quality time is number 1, no, I desire to do those things for you. And that changed our life so much. When we got quality time to number 1, it was wild what happened into our life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very underrated of the 5 love languages is quality time, right? It's the grass grows where you water it. And you can't have a great relationship if you're not investing quality time.
Yeah.
And quality time is such an important, I love that it is quality time, because it's like we live in a world where it's harder than ever to give quality time. And one thing I love about doing podcasts is I don't have my phone on me. We're not worrying about what else is going on. Me and you are engaged. We're locked in. We're like paying attention to each other. And I think that's why people like listening to them too, because we have less engaging conversation probably than ever, just because it's so much harder to find quality time than it was in the past. And so what are a couple exercises or other things besides the walk? I love that. I go for a 30-minute walk every day as well. I go with one of the guys that I coach typically, but me and my girlfriend go on, those walks quite often as well. And yeah, they usually get, our best discussions usually come on that walk. What are a couple other exercises that husbands can do to really show up and let their woman know that they're all in for them?
I mean, so I'm obviously going to speak from a Christian point of view, and so number one is really being that spiritual leader. And so what I mean by that is actually praying over your spouse every day. And so a lot of times people say, well, I'm not a really good prayer. That's just, I've never been good at that. Believe me, bro, I was the worst prayer. You talked about Steve before this, and I was just praying over everybody. I kind of learned a little bit from him. And then now it's like, I don't pray as much as him, but I pray over so many people now, and it's just so powerful. And because I do that,
what do you mean pray over them? What is that? Because I think my audience is more. I'm from Utah, so we're not as in depth with the Christian vernacular.
Okay,
what does it mean to pray over somebody as opposed to just say a prayer?
I mean, I guess it would be similar things. So I guess it would be that we're going to join together right now and pray out loud. Whereas a lot of men, they're like, well, I pray, but I do it on myself when I'm laying in bed or I'm driving in the car, which is great. I'm not dogging that at all. But when you take it one step further, that's the vulnerability piece. Is that when you're praying with somebody and grabbing their hands, you can say things that maybe you're thinking or that you want for them or that you're hoping for them, or maybe you're saying, God, I'm struggling with this right now. And that's a way of you kind of being vulnerable and intimate with God at the exact same time. But then you're doing it with your spouse, right? Jesus says where 2 or 3 are joined, I'm there with you. He says if 2 stand in agreement is something the Father in heaven will make happen, right? So why not do what he says, but it just becomes more powerful. They're seeing majority of the couples that I work with, because they are Christian, that's one aspect that I see where the husbands just aren't doing those little things. And when the wife starts seeing, he's reading the Bible every day, and I haven't seen him ever read the Bible, or he has to pray with us today, and I have never really seen him do that outside of random times. They'll tell me, the wives will be like, that's probably some of the most sexiest things they've ever seen their husbands do. And it's weird, right? Because they're just desiring that leadership in those ways. And so being able to do those things of showing your daily habits and practices. Another one is just being the disciplined man, right? Most women just are waiting for you to drop the ball, right? You said you're going to do this, but you don't, you do it for a week or two, or it gets pushed off. When you become that person that's ridiculously disciplined, no matter what, right? No matter you're sick, anything, you do those things anyways. After a while, you build up so many receipts for your wife that's like, okay, he's actually doing these. And 2, that voice that's in our head, the devil can't tell us anymore, you're this, because you've had so many days of discipline on it. And you're like, actually, I'm not. You can show that back to him and be able to shut that voice down. So your wife sees you just disciplined, doing things no matter what. After a while, you just build up the trust.
Well, it's very masculine, right? You're grounded, you're centered, you're focused, you're driven, you have a vision. Those are all very masculine leadership traits that a female, if she's in her feminine, is going to be attracted to. So that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
I think most men, I think that's where Christianity can be a big, boost to a lot of people is, having that focus on Christ just gives you direction and gives you a vision for where you're going with your relationship and with your life, and gives you a model to aspire to, right? Somebody that has shown a path of hey, here's how to show up as a good man. Of all the self-development books I've ever read and all the people I've studied, I mean, we have limited information, but we do have the Bible, and it's Jesus was the GOAT still, he was very much knew how to lead, and just he knew who he was, which I think is one of the most important things for people to understand is who are you? And then he knew what he stood for, and he didn't waver. And, despite anything, anybody could turn on him, betray him, call him whatever they wanted, dude did not flinch ever once. And that is, that true, just self-confidence, self-love of just knowing who you are.
Yeah. It's that authenticity piece that you talk about, right? And I know the same thing with me is, a while ago, we were on a coaching session, and me and my wife were talking, and she coaches with me sometimes if it's a couple. A lot of times it is just men I'm leading, but if it is a couple, she joins in. And I was just going in the zone, and I said, me and my wife literally have the Michael Jordan of marriages. And I don't say that to brag. It's just, that's my one thing. I'm not the Michael Jordan of
Are you
business
the
or other
Scottie
things.
Pippen, or is she the?
She's probably the Michael Jordan then, and I'm probably Scottie Pippen. Horace Grant,
Oh, there we go. Horace Grant.
This Rodman, I've got a little flair to me.
Yeah.
But with that, being said, I was going and I said, because so many men just need their spouse's approval. They need sex from their wife. They need them to do all of those things. And when it's a need, now all that control is on. And I'm not saying like in a bad thing, but now your happiness
No, any
is based on
neediness
them.
energy is a low level energy.
Yeah. So then now she controls the marriage, and not that we're not trying to take control in the marriage, but what I'm saying is she controls how you feel in life. So if she's having an off day and she's not affirming you, well, then guess what? You're not happy that day.
And women they'll lose attraction to the man if they know that the man's happiness is contingent upon how she shows up.
Yeah.
But when a guy's unwavered, then it's very attractive because she knows that he can hold space for all of her emotions and not be wavered. And so she's allowed to let herself truly be in her feminine and experience all of the range of emotions that is there.
Be her authentic self.
Yeah.
Yes, what I said was basically, I just said, we have the Michael Jordan of marriages, and I go, and Diane can go ahead and leave. And she goes, and so can he. She's like, because we don't need each other. I said, I desire my wife. She makes my life a ton better, but I'm so enough in myself and so enough in whose I am that I'm good. And because of that, there's no pressure. There's no expectations. And because there's no pressure or expectations, I attract her in, right? And same thing on that. But when I'm like the needy person, it goes away, right? That would go away. And so I see so many men that they're just needing it from it. Whereas like me and my wife, we've been, like I said, 25 years, and we have better intimacy these days than we've ever had, more frequently than we've ever had. And it's only getting better and better and better. And we're in our 40s, but it's because of those things. We're just becoming more and more who we are and whose we are.
So how do you help men that are needy that you're coached to not be that way, I guess?
Have them start becoming enough in themselves, finding those things. And so,
and what are some exercises you put them through?
So I'll just kind of know you kind of have some pillars, and I have two that are very similar as yours, which is ironic. But so I have 4 things that I say all men need. And it's the same thing for women, honestly. I say you need to have a deep relationship with God. You need to be authentic. You need to be vulnerable, and you need connection, right? And so connection would be like community of other men or other people, right? But just to break that down a little bit, like a deep relationship with God would be specific exercises to develop that relationship, being in the Word, being in a Bible study, being at church, just studying and really growing in those. And so then when you know who you are, Ephesians talks about that we're all chosen, that God knew us before that we were in the womb, that we're all here for a specific reason. And so once we've realized that specific reason, that gives us permission to be authentic, because now I go, I see the purpose for my life that God has for me. Now he's showing me what I'm really supposed to be, who I am. It's like I said, I had no idea I was going to be a husband or a coach. He just kind of slowly developed me and showed that to me. So that allows me just to be my authentic, real self. And to be authentic, real self, right? I don't care what anybody else thinks, which then allows me to be vulnerable and share my feelings with other people and my wife. And when you're vulnerable, what does that give you? Connection, right? And when you have connection, we all get the one thing that every single person wants in this world, which is love.
Yeah.
Right. But if you're not vulnerable, you're never really going to have a deep connection.
And go through. I mean, I teach the same thing, but go through it. And how does being vulnerable help you get a deeper connection?
Because they get to know the real things that you're actually feeling, right?
And what does that look like, by the way?
So, for example, I have a friend in my life, and this will probably resonate with a lot of your listeners. Just imagine entrepreneurs, people like that space, driven men. He's a believer in Christ, but not a follower, and owns 6 businesses. Moved here from Eureka, where we were a couple of years after us, lives here in Henderson now. And I'm watching his marriage, which was a good marriage, now start to have cracks. I'm watching his parenting now have really frustrations with his teenage daughter. I'm watching his businesses now be under the squeeze, where he's working like 100 hours a week and justifying it because I got to do it. And I'm watching no stress. I'm watching all stress, no joy, and just saying I'm in a season, but I've watched a season be 18 months, right? And the season's never going to end. And I've been having the life raft for him to be able to help that. Anyways, he finally comes to church the other night because he always watches online. Dude cried in front of his wife for the first time ever in his life.
Oh, wow.
And they've been married for 10 years.
Wow.
So now his daughter, who he's been having hard time breaking through with, sees him that he's not this guy who just works and just grinds all day and preaches, just get it done. She now sees he's a real individual right? That allows that connection, right? Because I go, whoa, he actually has emotions, right? But instead of just saying, suck it up and deal with it and just not sharing anything I'm going to, I'll just get it done. I don't really know you. I don't know that you struggle with anything. I don't know that you have all these other feelings. But if I share that, with my wife, that, hey, babe, like, I'll be real with you. I don't really know what God's doing in my life, or I don't know what's going on with the business right now. And I'm kind of a little fearful of that. I could really use some advice on that, or what's your thoughts on this? That allows her to then be a part of the mission with you. But if I don't share any of that and then I snap at her, she's gonna be like, what's wrong with this jerk? But if I share that with her and then later on, maybe I snap at the kids, she's like, hey, let me handle the kids, babe. Because she knows I'm going through something. But if she doesn't know I'm going through anything, she's gonna be like, this dude's just a jerk. He's always mad at everybody. Doesn't understand that, like, I'm under an extreme pressure at work. But because I've shared that with her, she'll understand, she'll help out. Then that builds our connection. She'll want to talk more. The more we talk, the more love we get and get to grow with each other.
Oh, that's beautiful. I know that, in the Christian world and in the Bible and everything else, it's very big about couples staying together and not divorcing. What is your opinion? Like, when should a couple move on or maybe get a divorce? Do you talk about that at all with groups, or is there a time where can every relationship be saved, and when is the time to move on?
I mean, great question. That's tough in this world, right? Because 50% of relationships are ending in divorce right now. And the other stats are saying that the ones that stay married, only 15% of them are actually happy.
Yeah.
So basically 85% of marriages are not going to work. That's like getting married and playing Russian roulette with 5 bullets in the revolver, so you don't really have a good chance. Obviously, the Bible only speaks on infidelity, sexual type of stuff, that it gives, I don't want to say the clause that you can, that is, but it doesn't say as soon as it happens to do it, right? Work your way through it and see, as you've seen here, we had infidelity. Now, granted, we weren't married at the time. Doesn't really matter. I still was a dirtbag. We were able to now use it for good and change our lives, and it changed my heart. I guess where I would say is if those things are repeat processes, time and time again, and they're not changing their habits, right? So oftentimes men say in our program, like, okay, I'm just not going to do this anymore. But then I'm still watching them still at the bar, still hanging out with the exact same friends. All their habits are the exact same thing. So no wonder their wife's like, it's going to happen again because you didn't change anything about it. You just changed your words, but your habits didn't change. So if you're seeing these things still going and it's continuing happening time and time again, that has to become a really serious discussion, right? Because they need to change, and it's not going to, are they going to do it or are they not, but I have to say it has to be at least a couple of years. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. What's the biggest danger facing couples in today's society?
I think it's what you touched on earlier, that the devil's working through and removing Christianity from our country and making it be taboo, rather than the other subjects that are now becoming accepted, being accepted. And Christianity is almost like, whoa, that's a weird one.
I feel like Christianity's having a comeback, though. A lot of my mentors, a lot of the guys I work with, Ed Milet, Erwin McManus, big Jesus guys, and it feels like it's cool to talk about it again, I guess. As Jordan Peterson's been talking about it, some other people, but I feel like it's having a comeback. But
well, I would agree, 100%. My podcast, I'm sure you connected with Ryan Pineda. Yeah, so I did a podcast with him. It's dropping today, and same thing. Dude's like all in for Christ right now. It is becoming cooler again. It's just being able to get it to that spot. That's why I love guys like that with platforms are using their platform for that reason, to make it cool again. And so as long as people are doing that, we have a chance, right? But if you remove faith from a relationship, man, it's just like we get the Romans 12:2 talks about don't conform to the patterns of the world. It's like when I was saying I was growing weed, like not that I was balling with like Lambos and things like that, but I literally had more than enough money as I'm a pretty simple guy, that I could spend. And I had free time all day long and a beautiful wife, 2 healthy kids, and a house. And I wanted to jump off the roof of my house every day because I got those things of the world because I didn't have that deep relationship with Christ. But now that I have that deep relationship with Christ, so one of the lines I always say is the external will never fix the internal, but the internal, when you fix that, all the external takes care of itself, right? Now those things start coming, right? It's like, and the money is cool, but it doesn't fulfill, it's not there to fill me up. And so as long as couples can keep Christ at the center and just keep that the main thing and keep that moving in the right direction, man, they'll grow and they'll stay solid. But you remove that and the things of the world come in and they attach on, and you're going to be in for a wild ride, because then you're going to have the sins of the flesh. Like you'll be wanting other women or other things, and you think they're going to make you happy and they never will. I mean, you
Mhm.
talk about that in your book, right? Like about once you get the certain amount of money, it's not as cool as you think it's going to
Yeah, I
be.
mean, it's a gift that, I got at a very young age. Is I got a lot of money and I realized, oh, this isn't going to change how happy I am or not. It's once your basic needs I always say, like, money's nice because it's a tool that you can use to help other people and you can buy your way out of trouble. Like, that's one thing I love about money. But beyond that, it doesn't change your happiness level. I mean, you can be in the biggest, nicest house in the world. I had a buddy that got a divorce 5, 6 years ago, and he had one of the biggest houses in Utah up on the hill in Draper, and it was this giant house, and he was alone, and he couldn't even stay there. He couldn't sleep there because he was so miserable in this giant house by himself. And so my point is like, it's important we go back to the first thing we talked about, like, you get the order right. Because if you put business first, like if you chase money, it's probably the easiest thing to attain. It really is. It's just a formula. And if you do X and Y, you'll get Z, right? Learn a skill, do it all day. Like, that's pretty much, you make a lot of money. But you do have to dedicate a lot to that in the process of that. And so it's like, if that's your aim, you better have a whole lot of money, because you're going to be pretty lonely if that's the only thing that you've really gone for, if you don't have the relationships.
Yeah. I mean, because if you don't come home, like, shouldn't be coming home just be like the most joyful part of your day. Like, man, I see my wife, my kids, all this other stuff. But if you come home and you're about to argue, or you guys are going to be tense, like, man, that's not who cares how much money.
Yeah, I
that
can
you
imagine,
have.
like, I have talked to a lot of people that, they don't want to be home. They find every excuse to not be
Yeah.
at the house because that's not a sanctuary. And, I think that's why it's, there's a quote that's, you can gain the whole world, but it's, if you lose your family in the process, like, you gain nothing, essentially.
Yeah.
I butchered the heck out of that, but
I know what you mean. One of the things that you mentioned earlier, like, what's one of the things that men can do? It's removing things that are blocking blessings from in your life, right? So if there's something in your life that's blocking and keeping your marriage as that, because maybe it is work, right?
Mhm.
Maybe, and people are like, yeah, but that's what provides for my family and all these other things. I think what I notice in a lot of entrepreneurs, yes, that is a tool to provide, but it's a lot of times it's for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so what do we need to remove? So we need to take a look at our life and say, what is something in our life that's blocking blessings in our life? Is it porn? Is it drinking? Is it friends? What is something that we need to take out of our life right now and just remove it? And so we stop doing these things, and then take the next one out eventually. And then the next one is we start removing. It's like the weeds from the garden, right?
Yeah, I always tell people when they're setting their goals, they're kind of, trying to, trim the garden of their life or whatever. I say, hey, what do you need to stop doing and what do you need to start doing? Pick one of each, right? Like, what aren't you doing that you know that you need to? Maybe it's reading the Bible. Maybe it's going for walks. Maybe it's just doing 20-second hugs with your wife all the time, or whatever that might look like. And then what you need to also stop doing, right? Just like you said, I like the way that you phrase that. Like, what is it that's impeding, God from being able to pour blessings into you?
Yeah. 100%. So it's funny that you not start and stop. I always say release and increase, and you
Sure.
guys sort of throw a little something twist on it, but it's so true, right? Like, just stop the things that aren't really serving your marriage. And it's hard, and it's kind of a dumb analogy I use, but I always say a lot of men, and I've done it, is they try to add new things to their life without removing the old. And it's kind of like wearing a dirty pair of underwear and then just putting a clean pair on top of it every day and not taking off the old ones. You know what I'm saying?
Have you ever seen those houses that have like 9 layers of shingles on them?
Yeah,
That's like,
they don't
reminds
take
me
them
of
off,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Same thing. It's like, well, remove the old and then put the fresh in and get fruit from that, and the good things start happening in your life. It's just scary. This was Peter when he was walking on water, right? Like, he was scared from being in the boat. It was windy and they weren't getting anywhere. Then all of a sudden he starts walking on water, and then he gets scared again because he looks back and just wanted to go back to where he was scared. But we see that in so many couples. This was my mom. She's still married to my dad. It's more comfortable to stay in a bad spot than the fear of what's unknown on the other side of that, right? And so that was the same thing for Peter, but that's the same thing for so many men. It's like, well, I don't want to remove drinking or this because at least I know what to expect. If I don't, what is really going to be left with?
Yeah, our nervous systems are very tricky because they're designed to keep us alive, and they know they can deal with the drinking life. They know that even though they're miserable, it's not designed to make us happy, but they know they can live in an abusive relationship. They know they can live with, whatever that might be, that destructive behavior. But the thought of doing something new, the body's going to initially have some inertia, some rejection, because it doesn't know. The unknown is scarier than even a horrible situation, because the body does know deep down that it can survive the horrible situation, even though it's not serving them.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's what I love about your life. I've only, you only come into my radar these past few months, but it's awesome. Like, I just love how you're actually living life, right? Like, That's what's when life's cool, is when we have something that's new on a regular basis.
Mhm.
It's the gym. We just can't go do 3 sets of 10 every day and the same weight and expect to get fit, right? Like, it's better than nothing, but we got to keep switching it up and just doing new things and plateauing. When I speak on stages and things, I always have this line I always start with. And I say, my wife had sex with 12 different men last year. And everybody was like, crazy, like, what the heck? And then I go, I have a whole way I spin it. But basically what I mean is, in January, I was one man. In February, I was a better man. In March, I was a better man. I become a better man every single month. And because of that, my wife sees a new wrinkle in me and is like, that's different. But the cool part about that is I see a new wrinkle in my wife all the time. And honestly, that's the thing that turns me on the most. We've all seen our spouse naked, especially after 25 years, so many times. Yes, I'm attracted to my wife, but it's after I see her on a coaching call say something I've never seen her speak with authority on before. I'm like, that's attractive, right? But that wasn't there the month prior.
Mm.
So she becomes a new person. Well, that's how after 25 years, we still are having better sex today than we've had, right? Because I'm having sex with a different woman every month. It's just my wife's becoming a better woman. But when we stay the same or get worse, then nobody wants that, right? Nobody wants the same spouse after a while. They're like, oh, here we go again. No wonder your wife doesn't want to have sex, because you're not attracted to your own self, let alone she gonna be attracted, because you're getting worse every year, let alone then getting better every month,
Yeah. No, well said, man. Well, for people that want to explore more of what you're doing, your coaching, what you're teaching men, where's the best place to send them?
Instagram's probably the best spot. So just Tommy McCollister on Instagram, shoot me a DM, or highlevelhusband.com. But I honestly just prefer Instagram, because then you can just start DMing with me and we can go from there and just talk about it.
Awesome, man. Well, I've enjoyed following you. I was watching a bunch of your videos and I just kept liking them and saving them. I was just like, oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. And
Thank you.
so a lot to learn there, guys. Check it out. And thank you again, man. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, brother. Appreciate you.
Thank you.